She sat on the small wooden bench in the corner of the practice room, her fingers hovering over the piano keys. The room smelled faintly of polish and old wood, and the light from the single overhead bulb made the small space feel even smaller. She had been coming to this piano every day for months, sometimes twice a day, and yet today felt different. There was a quiet tension in the air, almost as if the piano itself knew something was about to happen. She took a deep breath and pressed the first note. It was soft, almost hesitant, like a whisper. She had been practicing the same simple pieces for weeks now, the kind everyone could play. Friends at school had laughed when she told them what she was working on, saying it was too easy, that it wasn't worth her time. But she didn't mind. She had never been the type to need attention. What mattered to her was the sound, the way each note could feel like a tiny story. Every day after school, she walked past the busy streets and the crowded parks, carrying her worn backpack, until she reached the small music building tucked away behind a row of shops. The building itself was unremarkable, with faded paint and cracked windows, but inside, it held a kind of magic. The piano, old and scratched, had a warmth that no new instrument could match. She had learned to listen to it, to feel the way it responded to her touch. Some notes were stubborn, refusing to sing if she pressed too hard. Others would float effortlessly, like they were waiting for her to find them. At first, her teachers had been skeptical. She was quiet in class, often lost in her own world, and she didn't perform the complicated pieces that other students bragged about. She stuck to the basics, but every now and then, her hands would wander, improvising little melodies between the notes she was supposed to play. The teacher would stop, frown, and ask her to follow the sheet music, but she couldn't help it. Music had a way of slipping out in moments when she least expected it. Her parents didn't understand either. They appreciated her dedication, but they didn't see the spark in her fingers, the way she could make the piano hum like it was alive. "It's just a hobby," they would say. "Don't get your hopes too high." But she didn't play for hopes or recognition. She played because the piano was a friend, because it listened when no one else would. And in that small practice room, she felt at home in a way that nothing else could match. Some days, she would watch other students performing advanced pieces at school recitals. They played with confidence, their fingers flying over the keys, and people clapped loudly for them. She felt a pang of longing, a quiet wish that someone would hear what she could do, that someone would notice the subtle music she carried inside her. But she pushed it aside. She wasn't ready yet. Her talent wasn't for showing off. It was for discovering. Her routine was simple. She would start with scales, her hands moving carefully, counting each note. Then she would practice the pieces assigned by her teacher, simple melodies with a clear beginning and end. She knew them by heart, but she played them over and over, listening to the sound, adjusting the pressure of her fingers, noticing the slight differences each time. Sometimes she would pause and close her eyes, imagining a story behind the notes. A quiet morning in a small town, the laughter of children in the distance, the soft falling of rain on the window pane. She let the music paint pictures in her mind, and it made her fingers move with a gentle purpose. One afternoon, she noticed a small crack on the piano keys, a line that ran across the middle of the keyboard. She pressed the key near the crack gently, and it gave a faint, muted sound. Instead of being frustrated, she smiled. Imperfections were part of the charm. She had learned to work with them, to find beauty even where the sound seemed broken. It reminded her that music wasn't about perfection. It was about expression. Her friends didn't see this side of her. At school, she was quiet, almost invisible. She didn't speak much unless someone asked her a question, and even then, her voice was soft. Some students called her boring, others ignored her completely. But she didn't mind. She had her piano, and that was enough. And in those moments when she let her fingers drift from the sheet music, she felt a thrill that nothing else could match. Sometimes, she would imagine what it would be like if someone actually noticed her music. Maybe a teacher would stop mid-lesson and ask her to play one of her improvised pieces. Maybe the audience at a recital would lean forward, surprised at the depth in her simple melodies. She never expected it to happen, but the thought made her smile. She didn't need applause. She only needed the music to speak. Her teacher, though often impatient, had begun to notice small things. The way she could keep rhythm without looking, the subtle variations she added to every note, the quiet confidence that emerged when she played freely. "You have a good ear," the teacher said one day, "but you need to believe in yourself more." She nodded politely, not knowing exactly what to say. Belief was tricky. She wasn't sure she could even describe what she felt when she played. It was like stepping into another world where everything else faded away. Some afternoons, she stayed after lessons, sitting alone in the empty hallways, listening to the echoes of past students who had passed through. The sound bounced off the walls, soft and ghostly. She liked the quiet, the feeling that the building remembered all the music that had ever been played within it. It gave her a sense of connection, as if she was part of something larger, something that extended beyond the notes she touched with her fingers. Her practice sessions often lasted hours. Sometimes she forgot to eat, lost in the music, her hands moving almost automatically. At first, her parents worried, but they had begun to see that this was different from other hobbies. She wasn't just passing time. She was shaping something, building something that belonged entirely to her. And slowly, they began to understand that her music was a part of who she was. Even on the hardest days, when she struggled with a tricky passage or missed a note, she didn't give up. She would take a deep breath, start again, and let the music flow. There was a quiet resilience in her, a patience that came not from discipline alone, but from a love for the piano that ran deep. She wasn't performing for anyone. She wasn't trying to impress. She was listening, learning, and creating. One rainy evening, she stayed late in the practice room. The streets outside were empty, the rain tapping softly on the windows. She pressed a key, then another, and soon she was no longer following the simple sheet music. Her hands began to move faster, exploring patterns she hadn't tried before. The sound was messy at first, uneven, but then it began to flow, smooth and deliberate. She didn't notice the time passing, didn't hear the rain anymore, didn't hear the distant hum of the city. All she could hear was the music, alive and vibrant under her fingers. It was in these moments, when she played alone, that her secret talent emerged. Not loud, not showy, but undeniable. Her fingers danced across the keys with confidence, improvising melodies that carried emotion, depth, and a sense of story. She closed her eyes and let herself be carried by the music, unaware of how extraordinary it sounded. This was the part of her music that no one else had heard yet. And yet, despite these small private triumphs, she continued to play her simple pieces at lessons and recitals. She was careful, not wanting to show more than was expected. She wasn't hiding out of fear, but because she knew that when the right moment came, her music would speak for itself. Until then, she practiced, she listened, and she dreamed. By the time she left the practice room that evening, her fingers ached and her mind was full of melodies. She stepped out into the wet streets, the glow of streetlights reflecting on puddles, and felt a quiet satisfaction. One day, she thought, one day someone would hear it too. One day, the music she carried so carefully, the music that had been hidden behind simple notes and quiet hands, would be revealed. Until then, she would keep playing, keep exploring, and keep dreaming in the small corners of the old music building. And in that quiet determination, in her unwavering dedication to the piano, the first hints of something extraordinary were already beginning to shine. The day of the recital arrived quietly, without fanfare or announcements. She walked into the small hall, clutching her sheet music and feeling the familiar weight of nerves pressing against her chest. The space was brighter than the practice room, the polished floor reflecting the soft light from the ceiling. Chairs were arranged neatly for the audience, and a few parents and teachers were already seated, talking quietly among themselves. She had performed at school recitals before, but this felt different. There was a kind of energy in the air, a mixture of excitement and expectation that made her stomach twist. She found her place near the piano, her fingers brushing the keys as if to check that they were still alive. She had practiced the assigned piece countless times, every note memorized, every pause calculated. It was simple, ordinary, the kind of piece that anyone could play without much thought. And yet, her heart raced. Even the simplest music could feel different when played in front of an audience. She knew that the challenge wasn't the notes themselves. It was the presence of other people watching, listening, waiting. Around her, other students were warming up. Some were confident, chatting and laughing as they moved through scales and arpeggios. Others were quiet, like her, focused and serious. She noticed the way their fingers moved over the keys, the careful attention they gave to each sound. Some of them were clearly proud of their abilities, eager to impress. She didn't feel that way. She only wanted to play the music honestly, to let the notes speak as clearly as she could. The recital began with a few speeches from the teachers. The audience clapped politely for each introduction, and then it was time for the first performers. She watched from the side, observing the other students. Some played with confidence but little emotion. Others struggled with mistakes that made the teachers frown. Every time a student finished, there was polite applause. She wondered if anyone would notice her music in the same way. Finally, her name was called. She walked to the piano, feeling her heart pound. The audience's eyes followed her as she settled onto the bench, her sheet music in front of her. She took a deep breath and looked up for a brief moment, meeting the faces of parents, teachers, and classmates. She saw smiles, polite nods, and some curious glances. She nodded back and let her hands rest on the keys, taking another slow breath before starting. The first notes came out soft, careful, just as she had practiced. The audience listened quietly. The piece was simple, a gentle melody that didn't demand attention. Some people whispered to each other, some stared politely at the piano. She played steadily, letting each note flow naturally, not rushing, not hesitating. She could feel the subtle vibrations under her fingers, the way the sound filled the hall. It was familiar, comforting, and yet oddly strange to play it here, with so many eyes on her. As she continued, she felt herself relaxing. The nerves that had clutched her chest loosened slightly, replaced by a quiet focus. She could hear every note clearly, every pause intentional. She noticed the way the audience leaned forward unconsciously, listening without realizing it. Some faces were blank, some curious, and a few children in the front row seemed to watch with wide eyes, fascinated by the music. She didn't try to play for them. She just played for herself, letting the music flow naturally. Then, almost without thinking, her fingers began to wander slightly from the sheet music. A small flourish here, a subtle variation there. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, but enough to make the notes sing in a way that wasn't written down. It felt like the piano had its own voice, and she was just helping it speak. She didn't plan it. It came from her connection with the instrument, from the months she had spent alone in that small practice room. The change was subtle at first. Only those paying close attention might notice the difference, the slight shift in rhythm, the unexpected harmony. But as she continued, the music began to feel fuller, richer, more alive. Her fingers moved faster, more confidently, improvising small patterns that added depth to the melody. She closed her eyes briefly, letting herself be carried by the music. It wasn't her imagination. The audience was leaning in, sensing that something unusual was happening. A teacher in the back of the room raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. She noticed the subtle improvisation, the confidence and emotion that had appeared out of nowhere. Some students whispered to each other, unsure what they were hearing. A few parents shifted in their seats, their expressions changing from polite attentiveness to genuine interest. The room was quiet, the kind of silence that happens when everyone senses that something special is unfolding. Her hands continued to move, faster now, exploring the keys with an ease that seemed almost effortless. She wasn't thinking about the notes anymore. She was thinking about the feeling behind them, the story they could tell. The simple piece had transformed. What began as ordinary was becoming extraordinary, a small masterpiece emerging from the ordinary melody. She could feel the music stretching, growing, and she let herself go with it. When she finished, there was a brief pause. The audience blinked, as if waking from a trance. Then the room erupted in applause. Not polite applause, but genuine, enthusiastic clapping. Some people stood, others whispered to each other, and a few were wiping tears from their eyes. She sat there, breathless, staring at her hands, as if she had just discovered something new about herself. The piano beneath her fingers was warm, as if it had shared a secret. The teacher, who had always been patient but firm, approached her, a look of amazement on her face. "That was unexpected," she said softly. "You have a talent that no one knew about." The words made her cheeks flush. She had never thought of her music as something that could be noticed like this. She had always played for herself, for the quiet satisfaction of creating sound. And yet, here it was finally being heard. After the recital, people came up to her with compliments. Parents, teachers, and even students she didn't know stopped to say how beautiful her playing was. Some asked if she had been improvising, if she had composed some of what they heard. She nodded quietly, unsure what to say. She had never played like this in front of an audience before. It felt personal, almost private, and now it was shared with everyone. That night, as she walked home through the quiet streets, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The applause and kind words echoed in her mind, but even more than that, she felt a sense of possibility. For the first time, she realized that her music could reach people, touch them, make them feel something beyond the notes themselves. She had always known her piano held something special, but now she had proof, in the wide eyes and open hearts of the audience. At home, she sat by the window, looking out at the rain-slick streets. The recital felt like a dream, a moment suspended in time. She thought about the months of practice, the quiet afternoons alone with the piano, the hours spent exploring the keys and discovering new sounds. All of it had led to this one moment, this quiet explosion of music that no one had expected. And yet, she knew it was only the beginning. The next day at school, whispers followed her through the hallways. Students who had never spoken to her before looked at her with curiosity, some with admiration. A teacher complimented her during class, a rare smile on their face. She felt a little awkward at first. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, but deep down it felt good. Not because of the praise itself, but because someone had finally noticed the music she carried inside her. That night, she returned to the piano, alone in the small practice room. She pressed the first key, and the familiar vibration filled her hands. The memory of the recital still lingered, and she let it inspire her. She tried small improvisations again, testing the boundaries of her skill. It felt different now, not just personal but shared in a sense, as if the music she had played yesterday was still alive in the world outside the room. She began to understand something important. Talent wasn't just about playing notes perfectly or following instructions. Talent was about connecting with something deeper, about discovering what was hidden within oneself and daring to let it be seen. She realized that she had always known this, but the recital had given her courage, a spark that made her want to explore even further. Even her parents noticed a change. They commented on her confidence, the way she carried herself differently. They didn't fully understand what had happened, but they could see that something inside her had shifted. She didn't speak much about it. The music itself was enough to explain. And in those quiet evenings, when she returned to the piano, she felt the same joy and discovery she had felt in the small practice room. Only now it was mixed with a new sense of possibility. The recital became a turning point, though she didn't yet know how far it would take her. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about uncovering a part of herself that had always been there, hidden in plain sight. She realized that her simple pieces, the ones everyone had underestimated, had been a foundation for something greater. And as she continued to play, she could feel the music expanding, evolving, pushing her to try new things, to explore her own creativity without fear. In the weeks that followed, she kept practicing, experimenting, and discovering. Each note became a conversation with herself and the piano. Each improvisation was a chance to explore emotions, stories, and ideas she hadn't put into words. The memory of the recital, the faces of the audience, the sound of genuine applause became a quiet motivation. She wanted to see how far she could go, what her music could become if she dared to keep discovering. She knew one thing for certain. The music inside her was alive, waiting for the right moment to grow. And after the recital, she no longer doubted that moment would come. The days after the recital felt surreal. She walked through familiar hallways at school, but everything seemed slightly different. People looked at her with curiosity, and some even with admiration, though they tried to hide it. Her classmates whispered among themselves, trying to piece together what had happened on stage. Some of the teachers seemed genuinely impressed, exchanging glances and quietly talking about her talent. She didn't like the attention, but she couldn't deny that it stirred something inside her. A quiet excitement, a sense that something had shifted. At home, she sat at the piano for hours, replaying the performance in her mind. She tried to remember every note, every small improvisation, and the way the audience had reacted. The memory was intoxicating. She realized that she had only scratched the surface of what she could do. Before, her music had been private, contained within her own imagination and the small practice room. Now, she understood that it could reach beyond herself, touch others, and even surprise her. She began experimenting more boldly. The simple pieces she had always played became starting points, foundations she could build upon. Her fingers moved with growing confidence, exploring harmonies she had never dared to try before. Sometimes she played slowly, carefully listening to every sound. Other times she let herself go, letting the music surge, twist, and turn in ways she hadn't predicted. The piano seemed to respond to her with a kind of understanding, as if it knew what she wanted to say even before she knew herself. One afternoon, a teacher invited her to a private lesson in a slightly larger room. "I want to hear more of what you can do," the teacher said gently. "Not just the pieces assigned, but the music you make yourself." She felt her stomach tighten. She had never performed her improvisations for anyone before. They were private, personal, almost like a secret she kept from the world. But something about the teacher's calm, encouraging tone made her nod. She wasn't sure she was ready, but she trusted the teacher. Sitting at the grand piano in the larger room, she took a deep breath. The keys gleamed under the soft lights, reflecting her hands like twin shadows. She started with the simple piece she had been assigned, just to warm up. Then, slowly, she let her fingers wander. The first notes were hesitant, small variations of the melody she knew so well. But then, something clicked. The sound began to change. It grew richer, deeper, more alive. Her hands moved faster, improvising patterns she had only imagined in quiet moments. The room seemed to disappear. She could hear nothing but the music. The teacher sat quietly, listening. There was a soft smile on their face, but they said nothing, letting her explore. Every note she played felt like a discovery. She realized she was not only performing, she was telling a story. The music spoke emotions she didn't have words for. Joy, longing, hope, and even sadness flowed through her fingers, weaving together into something larger than herself. For the first time, she felt that her secret talent was not just a skill. It was a language, one that could connect her to others in ways she had never imagined. Hours passed without her noticing. When she finally paused, her hands ached, but there was a glow in her chest that made the fatigue seem insignificant. The teacher clapped softly, almost whispering, "That was extraordinary." Her heart leapt. She had done it. She had shared a piece of herself, and it had been heard, understood, and appreciated. She realized that her talent wasn't just for herself anymore. It was meant to be shared, to touch others, to make them feel something real. Word of her skill began to spread slowly. A student who had seen the recital stopped by to compliment her. "I didn't know you could do that," they said. Their eyes were wide with genuine surprise. She smiled quietly, not wanting to boast, but the acknowledgement made her feel lighter. For the first time, she realized that the world outside her practice room could be a place where her music mattered. A few weeks later, she was invited to perform again, this time at a slightly larger venue. It wasn't a competition and it wasn't a major concert. It was a small recital for local students, parents, and teachers. But to her, it felt like the next step. She spent days preparing, not just practicing the assigned piece, but experimenting with improvisation. She wanted to be ready to explore her abilities fully and to see if the audience could feel the music the way she did. When the day arrived, she walked onto the stage with a mixture of nerves and determination. The hall was bigger than the last and the audience larger. The lights shone down, warm and bright, and she could see people settling into their seats. Her heart raced, but she remembered the feeling of the practice room, the afternoons of discovery, and the quiet moments of joy she had found with the piano. She took a deep breath, and her fingers rested lightly on the keys. She began with the simple piece as expected. The melody was gentle, calm, and familiar. People nodded, smiling politely. Then, slowly, she allowed the music to shift. Small variations emerged, subtle harmonies that weren't written in the sheet music. The audience began to notice. Heads turned, eyes widened. She felt the energy in the room change, as if the music itself had grown, filling the space and touching everyone present. Her fingers moved faster now, exploring patterns she had only imagined in her dreams. She didn't think about what she was doing. She just played. The piano seemed to understand her, responding to the emotion she poured into every note. The melody she had started with became a foundation for something much larger, a tapestry of sound, full of movement and feeling. Some notes were soft and tender, others strong and powerful. The music rose and fell like waves, carrying the audience along in a journey they hadn't expected. She opened her eyes briefly and saw the reactions around her. Some people were leaning forward, completely absorbed. Others had tears in their eyes, touched by the raw emotion of the performance. Even the teachers, who had always been patient but reserved, seemed stunned. The room was silent except for the sound of the piano, and for the first time, she realized the power of her own talent. It wasn't about playing perfectly. It was about creating something that could move people, something that felt alive. The piece built to a crescendo, each note carefully yet passionately placed. She could feel the audience holding their breath, following her every movement. Then, with a final flourish, she ended the music. There was a pause, a moment of stunned silence, as if no one could believe what they had just heard. And then the applause began. Slowly at first, then growing louder and louder, filling the hall with energy. Some people rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Others wiped their eyes, clearly moved by the performance. She sat back on the bench, breathless, her hands still tingling from the music. The room felt alive, charged with the emotions she had shared. The teacher came forward, a look of pride and amazement on their face. "That was more than extraordinary," they said softly. "You have a gift that is rare and powerful." She nodded quietly, not knowing exactly what to say. The music had spoken for her, revealing something she had always carried inside. After the performance, people came up to her, offering congratulations, smiles, and kind words. Some asked how long she had been playing, others if she had composed the piece herself. She answered quietly, modestly, but inside, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment. For the first time, she truly understood that her talent was real, that it had the power to touch others, and that it had been waiting for this moment to shine. That evening, she returned home and sat at the piano once more. The excitement of the performance still lingered, but now there was also a sense of calm. She knew that her journey was just beginning. The music she had discovered within herself had opened a door to new possibilities, new stories, and new emotions. She wanted to explore them all to see how far she could take her gift. In the quiet of her room, she played again, experimenting with new melodies, trying different harmonies, and letting her imagination run free. She remembered the faces in the audience, the wide eyes, the smiles, the tears, and she realized something important. The music didn't just belong to her. It belonged to anyone who heard it, anyone who felt it. It was a bridge between her inner world and the hearts of others, a language that required no words. From that day forward, she approached the piano with a new sense of purpose. She practiced not just to improve, but to explore, to discover, and to create. Every note was a choice, every chord a possibility. She was no longer the quiet student who only played simple pieces. She was a musician, a storyteller, a creator, and the world had begun to notice. The memory of the recital, the moment when her secret talent exploded into something extraordinary, stayed with her always. It reminded her that she had something unique to share, something worth discovering and developing. And as she played in the quiet evenings, in the small practice room that had always been her refuge, she knew that this was only the beginning. The music inside her was growing, evolving, and reaching for heights she had only just begun to imagine. After the recital, life seemed to shift in ways she hadn't expected. People began noticing her talent more openly. It wasn't just whispered compliments from teachers or parents anymore. Strangers began to recognize her skill. Friends at school who had barely spoken to her now stopped to ask about her music, and even local musicians seemed curious. At first, it was strange to be at the center of attention. She was used to her music being her own world, private and safe. But slowly, she began to see the possibilities of what it could bring. The next week, she received an unexpected letter from a music academy in the city. It was a small envelope, the kind that might get lost in the mail if she wasn't paying attention. Inside was an invitation to perform in a larger recital, one that included talented students from across the region. Her heart raced as she read the words. They had heard about her performance, and they wanted her to play for a bigger audience. The thought was terrifying but also exciting. This was an opportunity she had only dreamed of, a chance to show her talent on a stage far beyond her small local recitals. At home, she practiced with more focus than ever. Each day, she pushed herself to explore new sounds, new rhythms, and new harmonies. She experimented with improvisation, building on the lessons she had learned from the private sessions and the recitals. She began to feel a new confidence in her fingers, a sense that the piano was not just an instrument but an extension of herself. Every chord, every melody was a choice, a story waiting to be told. Her parents noticed the change too. They watched her for hours at a time, sometimes just listening from the doorway, sometimes offering gentle encouragement. They didn't fully understand the depth of what she was doing, but they could see the transformation in her. She moved differently, spoke differently, and carried herself with a quiet determination that had not been there before. She had discovered something inside herself, and it was beginning to show in everything she did. At school, news of her upcoming performance spread quickly. Some classmates expressed admiration, others curiosity. A few skeptics wondered if she could really perform for such a large audience. She didn't argue or try to prove herself. She simply focused on her music, letting her fingers do the talking. The whispers in the hallways no longer unsettled her. They became a gentle reminder that people were paying attention, and that her talent was finally being recognized. The day of the city recital arrived, and it was unlike anything she had experienced before. The auditorium was large, the seats stretching far back, and the stage brightly lit. Musicians from other schools were warming up, their faces focused, their fingers moving with precision over their instruments. She felt a mixture of awe and nervousness, but she reminded herself of the practice, the quiet hours in the small room, and the exhilaration she had felt the first time she let her music flow freely. When it was her turn to perform, she walked onto the stage slowly, the polished wood beneath her feet reflecting the lights above. The audience was larger than any she had faced before, filled with parents, teachers, students, and music enthusiasts. She placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath. At first, she played the simple piece she had been assigned. The melody was familiar, and it gave her a sense of calm as she began. Then, as she had done before, she let the music evolve. Small variations began to appear, gentle flourishes that grew bolder as she gained confidence. The sound filled the auditorium, richer and fuller than the simple notes alone could achieve. The audience leaned forward, captivated by the subtle beauty and emotion in her performance. It wasn't just skill they were hearing. It was feeling, it was expression, it was a story unfolding before them. Her fingers danced across the keys, improvising and shaping the music into something alive. She had discovered the balance between control and freedom, structure and creativity. Every note had intention, every pause had meaning. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the music carry her away. For a moment, the audience and the stage disappeared. There was only the sound, only the connection between her hands and the piano, only the story she was telling without words. When she finally finished, there was a stunned silence, the kind that comes when people realize they have witnessed something rare and special. Then, applause erupted, growing louder and louder, filling the auditorium with energy and excitement. Some people rose to their feet, cheering and clapping with genuine admiration. Teachers and fellow musicians exchanged amazed glances, whispering about the talent they had just witnessed. She sat there, breathless, her fingers tingling from the intensity of the performance. Afterwards, many approached her with congratulations. Musicians asked questions about her technique, teachers offered words of praise, and parents smiled proudly. She accepted the compliments quietly, her focus still on the music, but inside, a warm glow of pride spread through her. This was more than recognition. It was validation of the months and years of dedication, the countless hours spent discovering the music that lived inside her. In the days that followed, invitations began to arrive. A local music teacher asked if she could give a short performance at a small event. Another suggested she participate in a regional competition. Her parents were cautious at first, but they could see how excited and inspired she was. They supported her quietly, letting her decide what to take on. She felt a mixture of nerves and anticipation. Each opportunity was a chance to test herself, to see how far her talent could reach. At school, her classmates treated her differently now. Some were openly admiring, others curious, and a few were clearly envious. She noticed it but didn't let it bother her. She focused on the music, on exploring her abilities and sharing her gift in the ways that felt right to her. For the first time, she felt that she was not just performing for herself. She was part of a larger world, a world that could appreciate, respond to, and be moved by her music. The quiet hours in the practice room continued, but now they were infused with a new sense of purpose. She experimented with more complex melodies, explored different rhythms, and even began composing small pieces of her own. She discovered that her talent was not just about playing music. It was about creating it, shaping it, and giving it life. Every session brought new challenges, new discoveries, and a deeper understanding of herself. Her confidence grew steadily. She no longer hesitated to try bold variations or take risks with the piano. She had learned that mistakes were not failures. They were part of the process, opportunities to explore new sounds and emotions. The music became a mirror for her own growth, reflecting her dedication, her curiosity, and her willingness to trust her instincts. One afternoon, her teacher arranged a small meeting with a local music mentor, someone known for nurturing young talent. The mentor listened carefully as she played, eyes closed, absorbing every note, every variation, every flourish. When she finished, the mentor's face lit up with admiration. "You have something rare," they said. "Not just skill, but depth, emotion, and a sense of artistry that most students spend years trying to find. You must continue to develop this." Her heart raced with excitement and a little fear. She had always known her music was special, but hearing it from someone with experience made it feel real, tangible. She realized that the path ahead would not always be easy, that it would require dedication, courage, and a willingness to push herself. But she also knew that she had discovered a part of herself that could not be ignored, a talent that deserved to be nurtured and shared. As the weeks passed, more opportunities came her way. Small performances, invitations to workshops, and even the possibility of attending a prestigious summer program for young musicians. Each experience brought new challenges and new lessons. She learned to balance preparation with improvisation, discipline with creativity, and self-expression with technical skill. Through it all, she remained humble, remembering the quiet practice rooms and the simple pieces that had first allowed her to find her voice. Even with the growing recognition, she never lost the joy of discovery. Every time she sat at the piano, She felt the same thrill of exploring new melodies, finding patterns that surprised her, and connecting with the sound in ways she had never imagined. The music was no longer just a part of her life. It was a lens through which she understood herself, the world, and the possibilities that lay ahead. Her parents watched her quietly, proud and amazed at how far she had come. They could see the dedication, the focus, and the passion in every note she played. They still didn't fully understand the depth of her talent, but they respected it, supported it, and allowed her to follow it wherever it might lead. The quiet encouragement they offered was enough. She didn't need anyone else to define her abilities. She had discovered them for herself. By the end of the year, she had performed at several recitals, small competitions, and private events. Each experience built her confidence, refined her skills, and strengthened her understanding of what she could achieve. She realized that recognition was not the goal. It was a byproduct of her dedication, creativity, and love for music. What mattered most was the connection she felt with the piano, the joy of discovery, and the ability to touch others through sound. And as she sat at the piano one quiet evening, fingers brushing the keys, she reflected on the journey so far. From the small practice room to the city recital, from hesitant improvisations to confident performances, she had grown not just as a musician, but as a person. She had discovered a talent that was rare and beautiful, one that had the power to inspire, move, and connect. And she knew, without doubt, that this was only the beginning of something extraordinary. The years passed quietly, yet with purpose. She continued to practice every day, sometimes for hours, sometimes in small bursts between schoolwork, but always with the same intensity and curiosity that had driven her from the beginning. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a companion, a teacher, and a friend. Every note she played, every melody she discovered, felt alive. She no longer worried about recognition or applause. She had come to understand that music was its own reward. But recognition still came, in ways she hadn't expected. Invitations to perform continued to arrive, some small, some prestigious. A regional music festival requested her to play, a local radio station wanted to interview her, and soon, even a music academy from the city expressed interest in sponsoring her for advanced training. Each opportunity brought nervous excitement, a reminder that her talent had moved beyond her private world. She accepted some invitations carefully, weighing her readiness and energy, always keeping the music at the center of her decisions. During one particularly important recital at the city auditorium, she found herself standing on a stage far larger than any she had played on before. Lights glowed down on her, and the seats were filled with hundreds of people. She could see parents, teachers, and music lovers from all over the region. The hum of anticipation buzzed through the hall. Her hands felt the familiar warmth of the keys beneath them, and she took a deep breath, remembering all the hours of practice, the quiet evenings in her small room, and the first moment she had let her fingers explore freely. She began with a piece she had composed herself. Unlike the simple melodies she had started with, this composition carried layers of emotion, intricate harmonies, and subtle shifts that reflected everything she had learned and discovered. As she played, her fingers moved almost without thought, guided by instinct, imagination, and experience. The music was alive, breathing through her, weaving stories that the audience could feel without words. People listened, transfixed. Some leaned forward, eyes wide, drawn in by the complexity and beauty of the performance. Others closed their eyes, letting the music carry them. There were moments of quiet introspection, moments of joyous energy, and moments that made the air itself feel as if it were vibrating with emotion. She had never felt a connection so strong between herself, the piano, and the people listening. It was as if the music itself had bridged the space between hearts. When she finished, the hall remained silent for a heartbeat too long, as though no one could believe what they had heard. Then the applause erupted, louder and more heartfelt than anything she had ever experienced. Standing ovations, cheers, and even tears greeted her. She remained seated for a moment, letting the sound wash over her, feeling the energy and gratitude of the audience. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about showing off. It was about sharing something real, something pure, something that had grown quietly inside her for years. After the performance, people approached her from all directions. Musicians complimented her technique, teachers praised her artistry, and strangers thanked her for the experience. A few children shyly asked her how she had learned to play like that. She smiled softly, realizing that her music could inspire others in ways she had never imagined. The recognition was overwhelming at times, but it also felt natural because she had never sought it. It had come simply because she had stayed true to her passion and dedication. In the days that followed, she reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the small practice room, the worn piano, the simple melodies she had started with, and the quiet moments when she had felt music flow through her fingers for the first time. None of this had been easy. There had been hours of frustration, mistakes, doubts, and uncertainty. But each struggle had been part of the journey, each note an opportunity to learn and grow. She realized that her talent had not just been a gift, it had been a responsibility. She could use it to touch lives, to tell stories, and to inspire others. Her parents, who had once gently reminded her not to set her hopes too high, now watched with quiet pride. They saw the dedication, the growth, and the joy that music brought her. They didn't need to understand every nuance of her talent. They could see the happiness it gave her and the way it had transformed her life. They continued to support her, offering encouragement and space to explore, allowing her to follow her path at her own pace. At school, she became a quiet example for others. Students who had once overlooked her began to respect her dedication and talent. Some younger students approached her for advice, asking how she practiced, how she stayed focused, and how she overcame nerves. She spoke softly, sharing what she could about discipline and passion, but she also encouraged them to find their own connection to the music. She had learned that talent alone was not enough. The love for the craft and the willingness to explore were just as important. She also began to write her own compositions, small pieces at first, then longer works that told more complex stories. Each piece was a reflection of her experiences, emotions, and imagination. She discovered that creating music gave her a different kind of joy than performing did. While performing connected her with others, composing connected her with herself in a deep, personal way. Both were important, and together they helped her grow as a musician and as a person. Over time, her reputation grew beyond her school and local community. Invitations came from further away, regional concerts, workshops, and even a few national events. She never sought fame, but she learned to accept opportunities when they aligned with her goals and her values. She remained humble, grounded in the knowledge that her talent was not for showing off, but for creating beauty, telling stories, and touching hearts. One evening, as she sat at her piano after a long day, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the small practice room to the city recitals, from hesitant improvisations to confident performances, she had discovered not just her talent, but her purpose. Music had given her a voice, a way to express what she could not put into words. It had given her courage, confidence, and the ability to connect with others on a profound level. She also understood that her journey was not just about herself. She had the power to inspire others, to show that dedication and passion could create extraordinary results, even when no one noticed at first. She remembered the young students who had asked her questions, the friends who had begun to respect her, and the audience members who had been moved by her music. Her talent had a ripple effect, touching lives in ways she had never anticipated. In quiet moments, she sometimes returned to her simple beginnings, the small practice room, the worn piano, and the first melodies she had played alone. She remembered the long hours of practice, the mistakes, the experiments, and the moments of doubt. She realized that each of those moments had been essential, shaping her into the musician she had become. Nothing had been wasted. Every note, every pause, every small improvisation had led her to this point. As she prepared for a particularly important recital in the city's main concert hall, she felt a mixture of excitement and calm. She had performed for large audiences before, but this event was significant. It was a chance to share not just her music, but her story, the journey from quiet practice sessions to public recognition, from simple melodies to complex compositions. She wanted the audience to feel not just the notes, but the heart behind them. The night of the performance arrived, and she walked onto the stage with confidence. The hall was filled, the lights bright, and the air buzzing with anticipation. She placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath. The first notes came gently, carefully, as they always did. But soon, the music began to flow freely, carrying emotion, imagination, and stories she had discovered over the years. The audience was silent, absorbed, and the sound filled every corner of the hall. She played with a sense of freedom and mastery she had never experienced before. Every note had purpose, every pause held meaning. Her fingers danced across the keys, improvising, composing in real time, and telling a story without words. The audience responded instinctively. Some moved to tears, others to smiles, all completely absorbed. She realized that this was what music could do when it came from the heart. It could move people, connect them, and leave an impression that lingered long after the notes ended. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Standing ovations, cheers, and whispers of admiration filled the hall. She sat quietly, absorbing the energy, feeling the warmth of the moment, and realizing the truth she had discovered over the years. Music was more than skill or talent. It was a gift, a connection, a way to touch lives and leave something lasting. In the weeks that followed, she received letters and messages from people who had been at the recital. Some shared how her music had inspired them, brought them comfort, or reminded them of forgotten dreams. Others asked if she would teach or perform again. She realized that her music had become a bridge, not just between herself and the audience, but between people, connecting hearts through sound. She continued to practice, perform, and compose, always growing, always exploring. Her story became an example for others, proof that dedication, passion, and perseverance could reveal extraordinary talent, even when it was hidden for years. And through it all, she remained humble, grateful for the music that had guided her journey, and for the people who had listened, encouraged, and believed in her. Sitting at her piano one evening, she looked back on the path she had traveled. From the small, quiet practice room to city recitals, from simple melodies to compositions that stirred hearts, she had grown in ways she could never have imagined. She understood now that talent alone was only part of the journey. Dedication, courage, and the willingness to share her gift were what made her music truly extraordinary. And as her fingers touched the keys, she played not just for herself, but for everyone who would hear, everyone who would feel, and everyone who might one day discover their own hidden talent. She had learned that music could transform lives, and in sharing it, she had transformed her own.